All right, so let's go ahead and get started. My name is Jim Williams. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Brandmaker. Permit me to just quick overview Brandmaker. If you are unfamiliar with it, Brandmaker is a company in the marketing operations software, marketing resource management software space. We help marketers focus on plans, performance, and productivity across a range of solutions, which include not only Brandmaker Legacy, but you might be familiar with some of our sub-brands, Allocadia, and Marketing Finance and Budgeting, and Hive9, Performance Management and Planning. So if you are customers of those solutions, use those solutions, welcome, you're in the right place. Today we are going to talk about plans, pivoting, and repeat, as we call it, plan, pivot, and repeat webinar series. It's one of two webinar series that we're doing today and one next week. I'm going to be joined by some practitioners, people that are in the business of marketing strategy and planning and operations. We have done a number of webinars over the last few months with the experts, if you will. We've had Forrester join us on a couple of occasions and talk about methodologies and frameworks for planning. But more exciting to me is actually talking to people that do it every day. And that's why we assembled this all-star panel. I will share a couple slides. You can ask questions as the panels. Please use the Q&A. And if we have time and they're on point or whatever, we'll ask those questions as we go through the discussion. Otherwise, we can ask them at the end of the discussion. And of course, we will share a recording of today's event. So you can share that with all of your friends, colleagues, family, loved ones, whoever it might be. So with that, let me share my screen here. Also, always the most dangerous part of the whole thing, PowerPoint. So with that, let me go ahead and introduce our panelists. I'm going to ask Abnita Gulati, Ron Myers, and Thomas Gunter to give me a quick introduction. Talk maybe a little bit about what your role is at your organization, maybe some of the characteristics of your organization, size, etc. And then we'll go ahead and jump right into it. So I'll start with you, Abnita Gulati. Thanks for joining.
Well, thanks for the intro. I'm excited to be here. So my name is Uptempo Gulati. I work for Visa on the B2B side of Visa. And my charter is Global Marketing Operations and Strategy. And I support budget planning, marketing operations roles, planning for fiscal year, reporting, analytics, database management, the slew of things that go into strategy and operations. And I'm super excited to be here. We're a great partner with Brandmaker. Excited to share all the learnings with my co-presenters and with the great team that you have, Jim.
Thank you for joining, Abnita. Ron?
Hey, Jim, thanks for having me here. I'm Ron Myers. I am with NSF International. I run the Performance Marketing and Operations team. It's a functional marketing team. We are responsible for the planning process as well as the management of metrics, campaign operations, so a big, wide variety of functions. And we work very closely with Brandmaker to actually pull that together and have one big picture that we take. So I'm excited to talk about this topic today.
That's great. And Ron, just pause for a second on you. I think most people are familiar with Visa and Cisco, but maybe NSF, quick overview. What is NSF's role?
Sure. So NSF International is actually a public health company. We've been in existence for 75 years. So we do certifications, consulting. We actually drive standards across several industries. So medical devices, water, so a wide array of different certifications. But our mission is to improve public health globally. And we've actually been at that mission for 75 years. And it's actually an organization that has global connections, about 3,000 people worldwide. But we take place in everything from certification of, for example, glass vials when it comes to different medical devices. So, MRI machines, but also water, making sure water is safe, food certification and testing. So wide variety of things, about 1,100 different services that we offer across the industry.
Great. Great. Thank you for the overview. I appreciate it. And it sounds like a great mission for an organization.
It's awesome to be part of that mission.
Thomas, last but certainly not least, tell us a little bit about your role at Cisco.
Thank you, Jim. So I'm Thomas Gunter. I lead our growth marketing, planning, and operations team. Our focus is around aligning strategy investment through a defined planning process for fiscal year planning, in first half, second half planning in support of the Cisco brand itself. We have a complex environment that we leverage today, Allocadia, to help connect the dots for us on how we're investing for what activities and where. And looking forward to this conversation. Glad to be a part of it today, hoping to learn something from not just the panelists, but also the participants today. Thank you, Jim.
That's great. Thank you, Thomas, and welcome. I appreciate all of you making some time to join us. And I agree, I'm looking forward to this as well. I mean, personally, I think I'm different from many of you on the panel in that I didn't come out of a necessarily either a financial or a planning background. I think like many marketers, I came from some liberal arts degree and somehow had to learn how to do marketing and then eventually marketing planning. And I am always learning as well. So I'm really looking forward to continuing that journey today. Why don't we start off with, let's get right to the heart of it. We can talk about our aspirations, but I like to focus on challenges. I think each of you have different planning and strategy challenges. You have different processes. You have very different organizations. Some I know are centralized, some are more distributed. Maybe we could just start talking a little bit about some of the challenges you face with the planning process. Amnita, let's start with you. I know that you have a very collaborative approach to planning, especially with the finance department. That's something that you've talked about and you're proud of. Maybe tell us a little bit about what that looks like in your organization.
Unmute first. So that's one of the challenges. That's been a great process and a great path. I joined the company about 3 years ago, and also in the past jobs that I had, planning and analytics was part of my charter. And what I've kind of put in place is a process where I work with the finance team all the way from the CFO to the core finance team to really invest in planning. And what I realized over time in my past and current experiences that the planning really starts 6 to 8 months before the start of the fiscal year. And anything less than that, you're in the reactive mode. And you're getting too much input, and it's hard to kind of distill what the important components are. And 6 to 8 months prior, when you start having those conversations with key stakeholders, what I've tried to do is look at historical data. What have we spent in the past? Where it is that the business is going? Who are the key stakeholders in the business? It's product, it's chief revenue officer, their organization, it's the chief financial officer, it's marketing, all coming to the table and looking at what we have accomplished in the past year, what it is that our goals are for the future year, and what it is that we have at our discretion in terms of data and validation of how we spent our dollars in the past. So just looking at all of that data, having those periodic meetings, sync ups, and one of the challenges that I uncovered over time is that each of these functions don't understand how marketing budget is spent and why, when we have an event in March 2022, that we are paying for it in September 2021. So that education of how we spend dollars for SEM, when do we bid for words, how dynamic the spend is, how do we spend for events, how do we spend for content, how further along we are in the process, and how far behind we have to go in terms of our investments. That bridge was the one that I really focused on. So I had this education series for finance team, and where I kind of showed them where the investment is done and for what purposes, what goals we're trying to accomplish, how they align with the business goals, and really got them along in the process. And from there on, the conversations weren't defensive. It was not that marketing is spending this money, where's the ROI? It was very well understood. There was no kind of clarification, always trying to explain. That was tossed out the window. It was more like, oh, this is great. We totally get it. You're investing in this event. This is what it gets us. You sponsor in 2021 in order to get the best spot in 2022. And we exactly know what products you're promoting there and how that supports the business's vision. So that, I think, was a pivotal point for me in my career when I uncovered that gap, and it became more of a collaborative effort than a defensive, always explaining the ROI of marketing spend that we all live with and have to defend.
Right. And that kind of originates in just somewhat of a lack of understanding on the financial side about how the business of marketing is actually run. You know, they kind of look
That's
at it from a
exactly
regular
it.
standpoint. Marketing's look at it as a series of activities and campaigns and outcome stand. So you started there. Thomas, I know from prior conversations that your time at Cisco has been marked by some significant changes in the planning process, right? It kind of went from a centralization to a decentralization, a little bit back. There's definitely some investment. You talked about just getting the language kind of consistent and universal. Can you tell us a little bit about that journey at Cisco and some of the challenges you've tackled?
Absolutely, Jim. So Cisco, our marketing landscape is not a branded house. We're a house of brands. We have Cisco and we have our acquisition brands. Many of you are familiar with WebEx. You may be familiar with Meraki, Thousand Eyes, AppDynamics, and so forth. So we do see a decentralized model where we have definitely marketing teams that support the brands, as well as marketing team that supports the Cisco brand as well. So it's a landscape of several thousand marketers across the company. And it's complex. Cisco offers, thousands of products, multiple solutions and services that are available to our customers. So it's a complex world to develop a marketing plan for. In the past and what we see even today, that complexity creates challenges for us with how do we align to the corporate strategy? How do we show engineering how they're being supported by marketing? How do we show sales that we're supporting them? And over time, we've learned that we have been a little more reactive, and now we're shifting to a more proactive lens that allows us to really anchor on those common themes that are that we want to convey to our customers, while still managing that point of how do we deliver and show that impact to the various aspects of the company. That proactive view is where we're in that transformation today, is looking to work stronger with our peers in product marketing, within our global marketing teams, to plan much further out in the process and really drive a tops down approach to kind of lead that planning process, while as we get down to the bottom, negotiating and coordinating. What do we really need to do? How do we tweak this to really land where we can be effective, ensuring that we can align the investment, a realistic investment behind those priorities in a way that truly differentiates the impact. And that's something we're going to be doing. We're in the middle of doing now. We'll be doing it over the next few months as we come into our next fiscal year. So it has been a complex landscape. Definitely hit bumps where the priorities of different entities within the company sometimes compete with each other. So
I'm sure
coming back in from the top to bring that together so that we're all in alignment.
Got it. And just so I understand that, is it, Amita talked a little bit about the relationship with finance and how in some ways that's the starting point. Is that the same at Cisco, or where's the origination point of the new plan and strategy? Does that come out of the CMO's office? Is it, or somewhere else? Because you're driving it from the top down.
Yeah, we're driving it from the tops down. You definitely have, kind of parallel paths in that the CMO is partnering with our executive leadership team to understand what's going to be important for Cisco's success, right? And so she's helping to shape that overall strategy. And in parallel, our team is working closely with finance to understand, well, what are those investments we're going to be able to make? How do we need to shift to support the needs of the business as well financially? And we help bring those together because you can't, as we all know, you can't necessarily build a marketing plan unless you know how much money you have to spend. Right. So, and in those points that Avnita made with respect to helping to teach finance how marketing actually spends their money and what for and why is critical for us to easily. You can have finance come in and say, oh, your budget's just flat, evenly distributed across four quarters. And that's not really the case for marketing, right? We have those peaks and valleys. So we do work close with finance to help them understand those peaks and valleys and to help us get the investment where we need it and when.
Very good. Awesome. That's great. Great overview. Which brings us to Ron. You can tell us a little bit about NSF. I know you've been there for a couple of years now, and there's been some changes there. I know you came in, of course, during the the pandemic, which drives enough changes and challenges and stuff. Can you tell us a little bit about the planning process at NSF? What does it look like and how it's changing? I think you're muted.
That's my famous thing. I do that every single meeting.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
I wanted to stick to the norm, but I've actually been there for about 18 months. And I can tell you that our planning process is really driven top down, just like Thomas was saying, right? But to a large degree, one of the things we had to do, because we had gone through an organizational transformation where there were a lot more cross-functional teams. And it was not something, a company with 75 years of history that had been in the science and the education field is very different. And part of what the senior leadership was doing was reforming the way we were engaged. So that top-down strategic planning really had kind of forced marketing to start to think about the way it planned. In the past, it was very much kind of from the back end, we get a number and build a marketing plan for that number. But it really started to go back to strategic alignment and prioritization. A lot of the marketing planning we do is harmonization. So that harmonization starts at that top level and works its way all the way through the system. And there are checkpoints along the way. One of the things we did was started to drive a different kind of accountability for marketing. And I think both Thomas and Nita said it, and I'll double down on it. We want marketing to be viewed as an investment, not as an expense. Because if you're viewed as an expense, the only thing you ever do is cut expenses. But when you have investment and you can show that you're actually bringing business value through that investment, then it's not a problem asking for additional funds because you can show incremental growth. One of our aspirations is to ultimately have a revenue target attributable to marketing, and that is part of our planning, and that is part of what we commit to as an organization. So over the course of time, last year we did a great job in terms of planning and developing those plans and communicating them. But as we've started to go along and started to use the metrics and the other things we put in place, we're really getting to a point where it's becoming an imperative business function and not just a marketing function. So it's a larger conversation than just marketing. We've got the businesses and finance and all the other folks involved. So it's a really good evolution to see.
Got it. Excellent. So it sounds to me like you're kind of top down. Thomas is talking about top down. Anita, I didn't think you addressed that. You talked much more about the finance, but it sounds to me like this is a plan that's being driven, again, from the executive office down through the organization. With organizations of your size, you're all pretty sizable organizations, is that a requirement? Is there some trade-off between top down and bottom up, and where does that meet? Or have you experienced that at your current organizations where you try and get a little bit more, where planning is pushed maybe to the front lines of the organization, and then there's some negotiation in between, or is it just always top down? And I'm happy to we'll start with you, Ron.
Sure. So, I think there is I use the word harmonization, and there is a harmonization that has to take place. Now, part of that is done through results, and I think Avnita was talking about leveraging those results to help drive your plan for the next year or for that next period. I think that's an imperative part of it, and it's important that Frontline has just as much voice in that process, because if we know there are things that are not resonating or not working at our touch point, we've got to be able to communicate that. And so part of that is somewhat of a negotiation, but I think that strategic alignment at the top is really, really important, because you want to make sure that what you're doing is relevant. The last thing you want to do is do a bunch of great activities that are driving results, but not the results you were looking for as a company. So that's part of integrating marketing into the larger picture, I think.
Very good. Thomas, you talked about having to, related to my earlier question, you talked about having to kind of deal with the fact that you have many lines of business, many product areas. In some cases, they may compete for attention and certainly funding against one another. How do you manage that? Like, that's kind of gets to the top down versus bottom up approach. What does that process look like at Cisco?
Yeah, very much. I mean, we do start, you have to have an initial opinion, right, before you get started or as you get started. So that's very much where the tops down comes from. It's the aligning to the leadership team of Cisco and understanding the needs of the business, forming an opinion that's directional from the top that says, okay, based on what we've heard, this is what we want to do across our campaigns. and then working down into those global functions, into the regions, to then understand those nuances of what's actually happening in their markets. You know, how are their buyers responding, and how do we tweak those plans? And so that's where we building this planning process for us with enough time to allow for that blend of tops down, bottoms up, so that we acknowledge and understand those things, and we can dial in. We can understand how a direction from the top may give us perspective, but as we understand what's in the market, we may have a slightly different perspective, and how do we balance that? So it is complicated, but it is using this tops down perspective that it's not, you know, set in stone. This is our guiding principles. In talking then with all the teams, how do we make this work so that we are clear on who's delivering what and when for what impact?
Very good. Makes sense. So, Abdi, would you say, is that similar to how you approach it?
I think one of the experiences I had, and going back to what Ron, you were saying regarding competing interests and competing objectives, and having that strategy come from top down, that alignment. So my personal experience has been, when we have done the bottoms up approach, we have got tactics, like activities, right? And it's like activity driven. This is how much we spent last year. This is the growth we're looking for, or the expected growth, or it's kind of a little bit of a guesswork there, saying this is the expected growth, so we'll invest more. Everybody wants more money. Every region is looking to spend more in their region specifically. So it's literally a list of activities and a dollar amounts with some increase as a percentage of whatever that increase requires to be as an expected goal. However, when we've turned it around and gone top down, it's exactly how Ron and Thomas were describing, where you give them the strategic goals, right? You provide them the kind of the big segments that we're investing in, whether it's awareness, whether it's, you know, awareness and perception, and or it's generating revenue, or it's MQLs or conversion goals, even going up one level to the business goals. What are we trying to accomplish? Are we trying to penetrate a certain market? Is it a geography that we want to sell a certain product in? So if we can give those business goals, and then the next layer down, where marketing can make an impact, if we can clarify those in big buckets, like I said, awareness and perception, driving demand, pipeline acceleration. If we can quantify those in either numbers or revenue numbers or opportunity numbers or MQL numbers or whatever, if that is articulated from top down with some high level numbers assigned to those sub buckets, then the rest of the activities roll up much better, and giving them that kind of view from top down, and then getting that informed input from them that aligns with that strategic alignment or strategic objectives, goes much smoother. And the alignment with other teams like product, the chief revenue officer, commercial operations is so much more seamless, and it makes for a great conversation and a great flow of information.
Very good. Do you run into challenges on that? This goes to anyone. You run into challenges with that, where you kind of get the, well, this is what we did before, and it, you know, it doesn't nicely fit into those top-down strategies, but hey, it worked for us. And it could have been, you know, Thomas, it worked for us when we were an independent company before we become part of a bigger Cisco thing. Like, do you run into those types of conversations and have to manage your way through that? What does that look like in your organizations?
Yeah, for us, we certainly find that even within the Cisco brand, and that kind of, we'll see that more in the teams that are out there actually running the activation, like field marketing teams, right, where you do see some of this conflict, or not necessarily conflict, just a different lens that they're using to address those things in their area. And so what that looks like is helping us learn from each other. You know, what is that perspective that you're bringing, and how does that relate to the overall strategy, and finding the way to weave that in. And at the same time, we do allow some, you know, it's not that there's this command and control type strategy. It is a collaborative strategy. Mm-hmm. And so it's taking some of that into consideration, giving some wiggle room, of course, for them to really address their market, because they know it best, right? So at the end of the day, we've had those conversations. We've shaken hands on it and agreed to it, and everybody's clear. This is what we're going to go do, how it aligns to the strategy, and what we're going to deliver. So we absolutely find that, and we work through it.
So you have to build up a bit of a negotiation type mentality to this. It's not rigid top down, here's the plans, etc. But everything's a conversation that can be informed. You guys do a little bit of that back and forth as part of this process.
That's absolutely right. And there's even, an idea that sometimes we agree that we disagree, but this is what we've decided on. We move forward and we respect that.
Yeah. And I was going to say that it has to be a dialogue. It can't be a one-way conversation because it's not an audience that you're just speaking at, right? There has to be a dialogue, and some of it is quantified with metrics. One of the beauties is as we move to more digital, we actually have a much easier way to quantify some of those plans. And look, having that strategic direction really matters because there's a difference between activities and action. Action is something that you do that moves you toward an objective or a strategy or a goal. Activities are things you do just because you're moving, right? Me waving my hands doesn't necessarily get us where we want to go, but at least it's an activity, right? And the thing you can get stuck in if you don't have a good metric system, a good system of reporting out, is that you do a lot of activities just because people want to see activity. But if you're showing action, like Avnita said, when you're looking at MQLs, looking at conversions, when you have goals that truly matter, or you have KPIs that truly matter to the business, it gives you a much stronger stance, and it's a different negotiating point rather than kind of cup in hand. You're coming with real business value, and those strategic decisions can be made in an environment where you have an equal seat at the table.
Yeah. Very, very. I love that, the difference between activities and actions. I remember when we spoke about that, part of our earlier conversation, you also were addressing the need for agility, and I think you quoted the no plan survives contact with the enemy. So let's talk a little bit about agility and adjustment. How do you think about that? Right. So you got this process started well before the fiscal year. So top down, here's what the strategy is. Then there's a bit of a bottom up. You go. Then you launch the plan. And that's where everything goes haywire for many things. Plans drift, activities don't align to plan, or just things didn't go as intended, or there's a new opportunity you didn't anticipate at the time. How do you deal with that? How do you change the plan midstream? And maybe Avnita, start with you. What does that look like?
That's actually what happens. That's the reality on the ground, and so the model we put in place, and we iterating on it every quarter. But we have this notion, this culture that we have created in the organization that is based on the learnings from the previous quarter, from the previous month, and then align those with learnings, conclusions, and indicated actions. And that's worked really well. We document that, and it's qualitative more than quantitative. And quantitative is the data that's supporting those learnings, but very quickly we are articulating those in a qualitative way to just say, these are the learnings we had. This is the conclusion that we make of those learnings, and here's the indicated actions. We do pull analytics in informing those discussions, but the indicated actions are really the root of it, because that's what we will change going forward. It's shopped around across the top management, across all the people that are executing on those indicated actions, and we have buy-in and sign off that this is what we're going to change next quarter. And this is the kind of investment either we'll take from one, give to the other, or invest further into it. Because if you're trying to get into a certain market and it's a growth opportunity that we haven't invested in, but we found out that to be the case in our learnings, that investment is critical, then that's the path we're going to take. It's a new investment, and we can't take money from here and invest there. It's new money that we need. So those indicated actions are really the root of it, that's communicated across the board and really put in action. And then we visit them that next quarter out to see how we performed in those.
That's great. So it comes down to a quarterly business review process, right? Where you actually, here are the candidates for change based on assumptions we're making and data that we've collected. And that is followed like a regimental process every quarter that happens.
Every quarter. And we do it once a month as well. It's lighter, but the quarter one is really heavy and intense and gets finance and other teams involved to sign off on it. So it's very well understood. So it's not like 4 quarters out, then the next fiscal year starts and it's any surprise to anybody. They've been part of the process. Yeah,
very good. Is that similar at NSF, Ron, or no?
Yeah, most definitely. Most definitely. I think there's a couple of pieces to it, right? Part of it is accountability. One of the things we do is we measure frequently and consistently. The thing I've often seen is if you don't have a consistent way of communicating the effects of those marketing campaigns, it's much more difficult to quantify it. And look, it was Colin Powell who actually had made the comment that no plan ever survives first contact, no battle plan ever survives first contact. I say no marketing plan ever survives first activity, right? And just think about the pandemic and what we went through recently. We all had events planned. That was a key part of what everyone did. That's where we had a lot of contacts. It was a big event that, you know, whether it was something like CES or any major event, GFSI, that was a key part of our plan. And we had to shift and pivot, and we had to shift and pivot in a way that really quantified and tried to take advantage. I mean, the fact that we do these things virtual now and we actually do them effectively is a net positive effect, but it's also much more measurable when we're doing these digital events. So there are advantages in it, but you have to be able to shift and move, because if you are too dogmatic in your approach, you're going to get left behind. And that's just the reality. So whether it's a pandemic or whether a major shift has happened in your industry, you have to be prepared and you have to have the flexibility to move with it. Otherwise, you lose footing and you're going to waste time, money, resources, and effort.
How does that happen in NSF? Is it just we've learned something new, we suspect something new, data says something different, so it's periodic, or do you have it much more like Avneet? It's a regular check-in where you actually assess what's happened against the plan?
Yeah, we have regular check-ins. It's something our global marketing leadership team reviews on a monthly basis, and then, like Anita said, on a quarterly basis, it's a much deeper dive. Now, those reviews also cascade and harmonize. So those reviews are not only happening within marketing, but with each of the business units and then with the functional units overall. So there's a series of reviews, and it sounds like it's a lot of work, but it's just when it's normal and it's part of the regimen, it actually does not feel unnatural. And with 16, 17 months into this process, we're actually getting to the point where that is turning into norming versus the storming that it started off with.
Very good. Thomas, tell us about Cisco. What does that look like at Cisco? The process of change, if you will.
Yeah. I'll talk more about kind of more of that last minute change. That often happens for us as you're starting to come into a quarter. Maybe something's changed, a shift in the market or a shift in what we want to really highlight the next month. So, yes, in a normal cadence, like we've talked about already, there is a strict review to look at quarterly business results and understand where do we want to dial up, dial down to change that impact. And there's monitoring and optimization that's done during the quarter to really look at real time what's happening. But when that kind of last minute change comes in at significant, that's where we lean back on the plan. The plan allows us to kind of go back into it and say, okay, we understand what it is we're being asked to do and how to shift. Now, what are the give and takes? Is it something that we're looking to achieve with net new funding, or is this something that we have to really shift in our envelope? So having that handshake on the plan and everyone understanding what we're doing all the way through our campaigns and our programs allows us to be a little bit more surgical and to respond well to say, you know what, we can dial down here and here in order to dial up over there. And so it looks the same as what you're doing, maybe coming out of the end of a quarter and changing for longer state. But when it happens in the middle of the quarter, we still have that same capability by leaning in on the plan.
Very, very good. So it's interesting. So I realize I'm looking at the time here, and I actually looked at the QA and some pretty good questions here from Drew. Actually, it's very similar to the question I was going to ask. I'll broaden it a bit. A lot of people are on this webinar because they're still learning how to do planning, and they're looking for valuable insights from experts in planning. And so what would you share with them? As people looking to, get up to speed with planning, or maybe they're trying to mature how they think about planning. What's the first thing you would tell them? Someone came to you and said, how do I can become better at planning? What's the first piece of advice? Or even in Drew's Q&A, he said, what valuable lessons have you learned? He's specifically talking about moving from reactive to proactive planning. But I'm just generally, what advice would you give to the audience around planning, best practices in planning?
So I'll be glad to start. I would say that you have to put a stake in the ground, and you have to be clear on what the objective of the planning session is. And it's not like you can have one planning meeting and you're done. It's a series of meetings. So you want to ultimately say, what do we want to be able to communicate, or what do we want out of that? What is deliverable from the planning session? So have an end game in mind, an end goal in mind. The other thing is you have to be committed to it. And part of it is understanding what that North Star is, and understand that ultimately, if you don't have a plan, then you're going to be in reactive mode forever, and you're not going to get out of that until you put a stake in the ground, start that planning process, and bring people along with you.
Yep. The reactive thing definitely hits home for me. I mean, I talk to my marketing team all the time about how nature abhors a vacuum. So if you don't have a plan, other people are going to make one up for you, which is not always it's not always the best. So that definitely resonates. Thomas, what would
I'll
you
add to that.
Oh,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I was going to say that, I walked into a couple of times in a situation where it's expense management. We are constantly having to do the POs, and to address Drew's question, if this is the scenario he's in, it's expense management, POs, SOWs, and we're chasing those down. So I think what it comes down to is just owning it, just kind of turning it on its head and saying, we own this planning process. Marketing has a point of view there. It's not going to come from finance to us. It's going to come from us to the rest of the organization. And we're going to drive alignment, because finance would be looking for, like you said, the ledger, the line items, the expense. And we are always chasing POs and SOWs. So change that conversation, own it, and have a consistent process. Describe the process, describe that North Star that Ron was talking about, document that, communicate that, and really own it. When you go to that meeting, you are the one leading those discussions. And honestly, if you don't own it, everybody owns it for you, like you said, and then they are telling you what to do. So as long as you own it, then it becomes yours.
Thomas, do you agree with that? Or would you add, how would you add to that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I would add in the process itself of building up this plan, and how do you get to a final plan? It's being really clear on what is the process. How do we make sure we're getting the inputs in? Who has decision rights? So what are the roles on the field, as we'll say? Who gets to decide, and when in the process do we do that? So I would add to that, having that clear line of roles and responsibilities, as well as what are all the steps in that process, is absolutely critical. Because it then, to your earlier question, when you got that reactive moment, you just go back to step one and you work yourself through that same process in a faster pace to ensure that you've really thought through everything before you make that final change.
And I know you've talked about, and from our conversations, you talked about the power of an agreed upon taxonomy, if you will, like almost having an agreed upon language when you talk about plans, whether that's, plans, campaigns, programs, activities, or whatever the way you organize, is how important is that? And has anyone here on this panel run into challenges where people are talking, different languages, and that creates a barrier to effectively carrying out the plan?
Yeah, I'll start with that, since that came out of our dialogue. At Cisco, we love to make up our own terms, right? So, and I'm sure many of us on this, attending this have that same issue. So one of the things we're focused on in this next fiscal is kind of resetting and coming back to that common language. Is a program part of a campaign, or is a campaign part of a program? Just really setting a position on those types of things. Are we calling it a campaign, or are we calling it some other, buyer journey or something different? What is it? So it has been important for us to come back to a normal taxonomy, that when we are talking to different marketing teams, that we have a common language we can use, Rosetta Stone, basically, to help us figure out what is it we're talking about? What do we mean when we see those things? So we think that's absolutely critical, and something we're emphasizing in this planning cycle.
So it's just like having, it's kind of bookended, right? Have a taxonomy and a language to describe the plan itself and its components. Just as important is to have a common taxonomy on measurements. Like, what are you measuring? What are the outcomes, et cetera? Like, I feel like certainly on the B2B side, the last 10 years is about everyone's starting to use the same language to talk about what you're measuring to come out of it. But on the planning side, that is certainly not the case. It seems to be all over the place. Every company I've been to has different names for the various components of the plan.
Right. You know, Jim, one of the things I'm sorry, I was going to say one of the things I would throw in on that is that having a marketing operating system, having a common way that we use that system is really imperative, because if everyone is on different systems, that's going to drive a whole different level of taxonomy. And I've seen people use campaign in so many different ways that it's sometimes shocking. So having that common way that we refer to campaign and defining it was actually part of what we had to do as we started to define that planning process. And you have to document it. You have to have a plan of record. Otherwise, it'll come in, and as new people come in and out and different influences come in and out, you have to have that common ground. So having a marketing operating system that we work from allows us to at least discuss it. And even sometimes, like Thomas said, we may agree to disagree, but this is the term we're going to use. And ultimately, there has to be a decision maker. And in most cases, that's going to be marketing operations, because we own the planning process. But it is important to make sure you've negotiated that through so that you have the stake in the ground.
That makes total sense. And it kind of highlights the last question I was going to end with. And then I think we can go to Q&A, because it's been a good conversation. But what is the system for communicating the plan, for revisiting the plan? Like, there is a system and a taxonomy. Everyone understands that. And there's measurements and systems for doing that. There's clearly an execution stack. There's a relationship with finance. But at the end of the day, when people want to revisit the plan and actually see how it cascaded from the North Star that we've talked about, where do they go in your organizations? Yeah. Is it PowerPoint? Is it Excel? Is it looking on some drive somewhere, going back through email? Like, what does that look like? Maybe I have Nita. I'll start with you.
Yeah, I would say we have technology in place to do that. We have the plan very clearly documented in this technology, and then we have it broken down by a scorecard. So there's a scorecard that this is all the planning and the numbers and decisions are rolling up to. So you can clearly see, and it's like one of those, how you have the top row in Excel, you freeze that, and that's always to stay. And then the numbers or details below that roll up to it. So that scorecard really determines how we are pivoting, what it is, where we are pivoting, and what decisions are driving that pivot. So we have technology for that, and we built a scorecard that all these decisions roll up to.
So the scorecard reflects the quarterly reviews that you talked about earlier in our conversation.
That's right.
Yeah, that's where that gets.
It takes the key components of those quarterly reviews and aligns it right back into the top Excel row, so to say, which is what the business objectives are, and the scorecard dictates.
Got it. Thomas, how about you and your organization? How do you revisit that and see that picture?
Yeah, so it's we rely heavy on kind of change management principles in our communication platforms. So what that looks like is, now the plan is set, now what, right? So it looks like focused deep dive sessions to walk through that plan with our strategy planning ops leads that are throughout marketing and with their leadership teams to help them really understand what is it we're wanting to do, allow them to ask questions. It also looks like all hands sessions with marketing to go at a very high level. This is what our intention is. And we'll go so far as, yes, there's a website, internal website with how you can access the plan, but a lot of times we also do require training for the marketing team. They've got to go in and kind of watch the readout on the plans, interact with Q&A and questions and answers, test out, make sure that they understand. And we solicit a lot of feedback in those processes through surveys to understand, is the message landing? Do people get it? What's not clear? We don't necessarily just assume the way that we conveyed it made sense. We make sure we check in, get that feedback, and address that where we see that we still have gaps in communication. So it is all about communication across multiple platforms.
Just like any good marketing, you can't get the message out once. It's got over and over and over, over communicate for clarity. Ron, how about you?
Yeah, we've got monthly report out and then quarterly, but we also are reviewing our overall strategic objectives with those report outs, right? So it's part of it, and we're checking in. But one of the key takeaways I've taken from what both Avnita and Thomas were saying is that having that high level and being able to kind of look at where you've been on the plan, it's very easy to forget where you started. And if you don't roadmap that, that's an opportunity gap, right? So I think that being able to look back at here's where we started, here's where we are, and understanding those adjustments is a key part of it. So that's a great takeaway I've had from this conversation. It's something I think we need to better integrate into our current process.
Well, that's good. Then this panel discussion has achieved an objective right there. At least the panel is learning from each other. Like this whole process is just an ongoing learning process, I think. Literally, I as I said, planning didn't come naturally to me, and I feel like I'm always learning, and I think my team can attest to that. We just did a planning session offsite I was talking about earlier, and some of it went really well, and some of it could be a lot smoother. So like I said, I'm learning from this process as well. I'm looking at the Q&A here, and I think a couple of them we already addressed about the lessons you learned from reactive to proactive. There's another one in here. Question about Avnita, is the technology platform you refer to and the scorecard utilize the same common technology platform for the whole business? Does everyone access the scorecard, or is that just the planning group that's accessing your scorecard?
So it's visible to everybody. They can access it, but it is communicated out every quarter. So everybody has visibility into it. Everybody has input into it. So we consolidate in operations. We are consolidating that input. We are aligning it and inputting it into the scorecard, and then communicating out to leadership and to the rest of the team, the marketing team across all functions and geographies. So they have visibility to it. So it's out there for reference. We send reminders as part of our communication protocol to make sure they have their eyes on it. And when we have these quarterly business reviews, it's referenced. So people have it top of mind. They're reminded, if they haven't looked at it, they're reminded of it. So it's part of our DNA. And that's what, communicating it again, and then bringing it as part of our discussions just reinforces that all the way from top down to bottom up, where folks have to be accountable for knowing it, for really internalizing it, and not just looking at it as a number or something that somebody does, but it's more like we all collectively own it and collaborate to put it together.
Very good. Very good. Well, with that, I think what I'm going to do, because I saw Stephanie pop on the video very briefly, for those of you who thought that we had a fourth panelist joining us, we don't. Stephanie is actually one of our awesome solution engineers, and I invited her on because we've kind of come to the end, 12:50. As I said, wow, an hour-long panel discussion seems like a long time, but there you go, great conversation. 50 minutes are gone just like that. And I wanted to reserve the last 10 minutes for those of you in the audience that are curious about Brandmaker's role in planning and performance and productivity, what our software does. If you would like to stay on, totally voluntary, you're welcome to stay on for what we call the backstage pass. That's where Stephanie actually can walk through exactly what our software does to help people with the planning process and the financial management process. So if you'd like to stick around and see that, you're curious about Brandmaker and our solutions, and please do that. Before I turn it over to her entirely, I just want to again take a moment to thank you, Thomas, Ron, Avnita. Really appreciate it. I know we're all very busy as marketers. You guys have a lot on your plate. So taking an hour out of your week to help the learning process, help educate our audiences is greatly appreciated. Thank you very much. For those of you who are still on, I know Tao's going to be upset with me because I didn't share this earlier and I was supposed to, but this is the first of 2 conversations with practitioners. We are actually doing another one next week, which is next Tuesday, where I'll be joined by 3 more practitioners. I'm really excited to do that. The same page that you visited to sign up for this, you can see what the agenda is and who the speakers are. If you want to continue to learn on planning, please sign up and join us next week. And that's it. That'll be a wrap for us today. Again, thank you for your contributions. Thank you, audience, for attending. If you'd like to stick around and hear Stephanie walk through a quick overview of our solutions, please do that. Otherwise, have a great day.
Thank you, Jim. Hello, everyone. My name is Stephanie Schultes. I'm a Senior Solutions Engineer. I'm with our pre-sales team. Since we have about 8 minutes left, let's dive right in. I'm going to take you through some of the areas of the Hive9 platform, which focuses around planning and a little bit into projecting out the performance and the ROI for the year around your marketing plans. So at a high level, the Hive9 solution, it saves marketers time and improves the business results of their plans because they can stop wasting their time in various spreadsheets and better collaborate around shared goals and spending decisions. So that increased visibility that comes with the Hive9 platform helps to eliminate any duplicative programs, and it aligns all marketing activities to their strategy and top-level targets. Now, the importance of planning is governance. Marketing organizations require structure and operating standards in order to perform. Supporting systems must enable the enforcement of those standards and structures. So most marketing functions employ some form of a campaign framework and hierarchy, and that should be clearly evident in their plans, which most enterprises maintain their plans in Hive9, getting them out of Excel. So what I have on my screen, I have a few different views of my marketing plan. I'm going to look at a couple of them, in this case, from a budget and cost point of view. In each of my views, I have a hierarchy in place. My plans are always at the highest level. Expanding that shows my next level down at the campaign level, which I have here representing my 3 markets that I'm targeting. Below that are my marketing programs. Let's expand that out. And then within those programs are the tactics or the activities that marketing is executing and the line items also within each of those tactics. So I can very easily see from my marketing plan how my tactics are consuming budget with my costs from the lowest level rolling on up. Hive9 also supports a custom and unlimited segmentation through attributes at each level of the framework. That advanced segmentation with the hierarchy enables marketers to do a meaningful analysis of their plans and have an excellent conversation with others in the organization, perhaps narrowing in on specific segments that matter to the org. So we do this with filters and with a pivoting feature. I can view from here my planned costs through the lens of any attribute, like persona, like industry, or tactic type or activity type, just to name a few. So if I were to pivot and I want to view this based on vertical, I am now viewing my Meridian and my Zodiac plans, the 2 plans that I have selected in my view, by industry. I could take it a step further if I'd like to filter down to geography, but this helps me to have a conversation. Say if my CEO says that we're doubling down on the financial services sector, then my plan should be able to reflect that accordingly. And I can have any number of unlimited plans with date flexibility from quarters, a year-to-date view, down to specific weeks. So in this case, I'm viewing my plans on a quarterly basis. But if I want to get down to a more granular level, aside from our budget and cost view, we also have a grid view for full Excel-like editing, but I also have a calendar. My hierarchy is maintained, but instead I'm now looking at my tactics that are spread across a calendar, color-coded by the tactic type for the time frame that I've selected. In this case, maybe my quarterly view isn't relevant to me. Depending on who I am in the organization, a specific week might be most relevant for me to be able to execute and do my job. I can export my plans. I can share them with stakeholders. So we integrate with Outlook and Google Calendar as well if you're looking to share your marketing calendar with those who do not have a Hive9 license, for example, with your sales team or with executives. Now, let's take it a step further. I've done my planning. I have my calendar in place. I can see my activities that are in market. I can interact with those. I can make changes on the fly, drag and drop my activities. I can even see, well, this activity cost is $77,000, $78,000 of planned costs. If I want to dig in to see how that's being spent across line items, we can do that as well. But once we've done all that, let's think about how we're able to measure the return on investment, predict the results of our plans. That's where we turn to performance management in Hive 9. What you don't see on the screen here is that every plan is backed by a revenue model. That revenue model is going to take into consideration your waterfall conversion stages, your rates, your stage velocities, and your average deal size. It can be modeled for different markets and different geographies. So it's putting your plans and the performance in the context of your world. And that model is what allows us to predict the results of the plan for the year. For example, I can view my overall plan to see how I'm tracking against my goals and comparing against my actuals, comparing the revenue based on any number, based on the metrics, and segmented based on however it is that your system would be configured. So if you want to assess the performance by geography, by vertical, you have the data to do so to continue to make an impact on your plan for the year. The power of Hive 9 also supports advanced predictive waterfall stage attribution analysis. So that includes, based on that revenue model, actual stack ranked campaign and tactic performance, along with the predicted results, so that your plans can be easily adapted to actual market conditions. And any changes that you make to your plan, say, for example, if you make an investment change based on the performance of a tactic, that will impact the predictive analysis in real time. Now, I am happy to go through a very detailed, thorough demo of the platform for anyone who would like it, but I also want to be respectful of time. I noticed that we have a minute left. That was a very high-level overview of planning and performance in Hive 9, and I would love to meet with anyone individually for a conversation on what that would look like for your organization and use cases. Jim, back over to you.
Stephanie, that could be the most value-packed 7 minutes I've seen in a while. Very good job. That was a great overview of the product. For those of you who are interested in our solutions and how we enable better planning, performance, productivity, there you have it. And Stephanie loves doing these individually for folks to talk about how it works for their business. So if you're interested in that, just come to our website and request a demo and we'll be in touch shortly. Again, thank you for joining us, panelists. Thank you for joining us, audience. Everyone have a wonderful day.